He thought the worst betrayal in his life was losing his wife to his best friend, until he uncovered a multi-million-dollar conspiracy that had been using him as the perfect cover. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about turning heartbreak into the downfall of the most powerful fraud ring in the country. And the man they thought was weak, he was just getting started. The tan envelope had remained unopened on Logan Pierce's kitchen counter for nearly 4 days. He didn't need to open it to know its contents. Certain documents carried a weight that could be felt without breaking the seal. Still, what stung more than the official sting of a divorce filing was the cheerful yellow post it stuck on the front. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ruby's sweeping, playful script. Its message, far colder than its pastel background, stated that his consistency had become exhausting. She and Wade would handle the accounts better from now on. Wade Miller, the best friend since undergrad, the best man at their wedding 8 years prior. Logan found himself alone in the sleek but lifeless kitchen of their Maryland home, sunlight filtering in and casting long shadows on the quartz countertops they had installed just last year. The silence was unbearable, filled with the ghost of her laughter, the soft hum of her favorite records, the scent of her perfume. Instinctively, Logan reached for his phone and logged into the joint banking app. The emptiness staring back at him was expected, yet it still sent a wave of nausea through his chest. Every penny gone. 18 years of financial prudence, of choosing second-hand cars over flashy ones, of staying late at the office while Ruby pursued creative projects and spiritual retreats. All wiped out in less than 72 hours. Retirement accounts, savings for a vacation that never happened, even his private investment portfolio, all cleared with surgical precision. He sat motionless for a moment, the familiar whir of the coffee machine breaking the stillness like a cruel reminder. For years, his mornings followed the same pattern. Wake before 6, brew coffee, scan market reports, kiss Ruby goodbye, and drive into the city by 7:30. That routine had become his entire identity, disciplined, predictable, useful, until the very thing that defined him became the excuse to leave him behind. Logan moved slowly to his home office, the weight of every step anchoring him deeper in the reality of what had transpired. His colleagues at the Financial Enforcement Bureau often joked about his machine-like demeanor. Some admired it, others mocked it. Ruby had echoed their words more than once, accusing him of being emotionally absent. But now the machine was stirring with something new, not outrage but clarity. As he opened his laptop, his mind began dissecting the recent past with chilling efficiency. The pieces were all there. Ruby's sudden obsession with wellness retreats, unexplained expenses disguised as investments, the overly technical crypto talk from Wade that used to bore him at parties. The very patterns he hunted for a living, fraud, misappropriation, manipulation, had been unfolding right under his nose. And he had missed them, or worse, ignored them. That would not happen again. Logan didn't spiral. He recalibrated. Over the next year and a half, he became a quiet force at the Bureau. He moved into a minimalist apartment in Arlington, sold the house, liquidated the furniture. He focused exclusively on high-level financial crime cases, developing a near-mythical status for his ability to track invisible links between illicit trades and offshore entities. He earned respect but also distance. No one truly knew him anymore, and that's exactly how he wanted it. By the time he met Sophia Lane at a professional networking fundraiser in early 2022, Logan had been celibate in every sense, emotionally, physically, mentally. But Sophia, graceful and brilliant in a quiet way, seemed different. She challenged his ideas with questions instead of cynicism. She was witty but never cutting. Their relationship escalated quickly, built on intellectual chemistry and the mutual understanding of ambition. They married within 6 months. Looking back, Logan would consider that his only real misstep. He should have remembered that lightning does strike twice. That betrayal isn't always a messy explosion. It can be a slow corrosion. By late autumn of 2023, Logan began noticing irregularities. Sophia's new role as an executive assistant to Don Harper, the Bureau's rising star and newly appointed deputy director, was unexpected. Her lack of administrative background made the position surprising, but Don had brushed off all questions with a politician's smile. We need fresh eyes and instinctive talent in the office. Logan, however, no longer dismissed patterns. He quietly started compiling data. Not just the trading logs that came across his desk, but subtle shifts in behavior, inconsistencies in timelines, unexplained late nights. Just like before, only this time he wasn't blind. This time, he was already building a digital map of names, account numbers, and offshore transfers. And at the center of that web, Don Harper. By New Year's Eve, Logan had decrypted enough information to know that something far more sinister was at play. This wasn't just personal betrayal. It was systemic. It was institutional. And unlike before, Logan wasn't just going to survive it. He was going to bring it all down. By the time Logan Pierce agreed to marry Sophia Lane, he believed he had built enough emotional armor to protect himself. He had become someone new, more methodical, more guarded, someone who had already walked through fire and refused to be burned again. But the truth was, he'd mistaken recovery for immunity. Sophia entered his life like a breath of sophistication and precision. Her world was one of elevated conversation and curated elegance, where every statement was measured, every smile deliberate. To Logan, she appeared to be the antidote to chaos. Ambitious but emotionally balanced, insightful without being invasive. Their bond formed quickly, rooted in shared ambition and intellectual alignment. Their marriage was a carefully constructed equation. Even her integration into his professional life seemed serendipitous at first. Don Harper, the newly promoted deputy director at the bureau, had offered her a position as his executive assistant. Harper praised her instinct, her organizational sense, her intangible potential. No one questioned it, not even Logan. He should have. By the end of summer 2023, Logan noticed changes he couldn't dismiss. Sophia's work hours stretched late into the night, her excuses seamless but generic. Her phone now rarely left her sight, her reactions slightly too controlled when he glanced at her screen. There were sudden new expenses filed under innocuous categories. Gifts for colleagues, working dinners, wardrobe for professional appearances. Logan's background in forensic accounting meant he didn't need confrontation to find the truth. Instead, he compiled information, subtle and incremental. It started with transaction logs, then metadata from photos she didn't know he could access. He cross-referenced public company announcements with the timing of her meetings. Patterns began to emerge, faint at first, but unmistakable to a trained mind. Don Harper was central to those patterns. A man who projected tailored authority with his custom suits and silver-streaked charm. Charismatic and sharp, he had become a fixture within the enforcement division's leadership. But Logan saw the cracks. Harper's sudden interest in specific merger investigations. His tendency to insert himself into high-profile cases. And more than that, his connection to Sophia, which now felt less like mentorship and more like orchestration. Logan began logging everything. A secure private server hosted offshore became his evidence vault. Every data point was backed up threefold. Every suspicious transaction, every cryptic message, every unexplained shift in workflow. It was all categorized and indexed. Years in fraud investigations had taught him that circumstantial evidence could be crushed in court. What he needed was systemic proof. Sophia, unaware of the net slowly tightening around her, continued her subtle shift from companion to observer. Her interest in Logan's cases grew noticeably specific. She asked questions about internal audits, report timelines, regulatory gaps. Once, she casually mentioned a firm that had recently been cleared in a trade irregularity, asking whether they had passed Logan's review. That night, Logan installed an access log on his home office system. She tried to enter the following week. The digital lock registered an attempt at 11:48 p.m. She claimed she was searching for aspirin. Logan didn't argue. Instead, he strengthened the encryption, mirrored the files, and documented the attempt. She was no longer a partner. She was a variable to be controlled. Meanwhile, the data patterns grew louder. Trades made just hours before merger announcements, all flying just beneath the radar of mandatory reporting thresholds. When Logan traced the accounts, he found shell companies registered in Gibraltar, Belize, and Panama, classic havens for shadow capital. More disturbing was the common thread among them. Each was indirectly tied to individuals with personal or professional ties to Don Harper. It was Emma Kwan, head of corporate communications and one of the few people Logan still trusted, who brought the final connection into focus. She had quietly observed similar anomalies in press coordination, leaks, suspicious early coverage, timed public relations moves. One afternoon in February 2024, she walked into Logan's office with a quiet urgency in her posture and a flash drive in her hand. She had data on the Callahan-Sterling merger. Short positions placed 3 days before the official collapse of the deal. The traders behind those moves? A cluster of accounts tied to Harper's former clients. It was the clearest sign yet that this wasn't just isolated opportunism, it was structured manipulation. Logan didn't flinch. He thanked her and returned to his screen, adding the new nodes to his digital map. There was now a web of influence forming, not just among traders and brokers but inside the bureau itself. Regulatory shifts, media leaks, account movement, all of it forming the outline of something massive. Sophia's messages became more careful. Harper's interactions more calculated. But Logan had already decided. This time, he wouldn't be blindsided. The betrayal had begun long before he noticed it, but the reckoning would arrive on his terms. By the time spring arrived in 2024, Logan Pierce had already transformed his modest apartment into a high-security command center. Gone were the echoes of domestic comfort and quiet companionship, replaced instead with server towers, encrypted systems, and walls lined with whiteboards and digital projections. This was no longer a reaction to betrayal. It was a calculated operation against something far more sinister. Logan's private map of connections now spanned across 3 walls. He used color-coded pathways and QR-tagged profiles to visualize the movement of funds, the timing of trades, and the influence patterns connecting offshore entities, shell companies, and a rotating roster of names tied to Don Harper. Red lines marked confirmed illegal trades. Yellow for suspect communications. Green tracked offshore accounts. Blue linked personal relationships. Each strand pulled tighter with every passing day. Sophia Lane, once at the center of his world, had become a known entity in that network. Her link to Harper dated back nearly 2 years prior to their marriage, and Logan's decrypted archive revealed communications that were as chilling as they were efficient. They hadn't just targeted him randomly. He had been identified, studied, and deliberately inserted into a role he didn't know he was playing. The Bureau's internal firewall. His reputation for integrity made their conspiracy seem impossible. Harper and Sophia had used him as a shield. It was a Tuesday morning in March when everything truly crystallized. Logan had arrived at the Bureau early, as he always did, long before the clatter of keyboards or the scent of burnt coffee filled the halls. His latest scan of trade logs flagged a disturbing pattern. A series of options trades placed just days before 3 different regulatory announcements. What stood out wasn't just the precision of the timing, but the names attached to the accounts. Each trade was tied to individuals Harper had reportedly been involved with romantically over the past several years. Logan's mind connected the pattern instantly, intimate relationships used as pipelines for insider information. The romantic ties would end, but the trades continued, often growing in volume and sophistication. It was extortion in disguise, hidden behind the veil of past intimacy. One name jumped out more than the rest: Ethan Burke. Burke had long served in the Bureau's accounting division, low profile, rarely vocal, always present. Logan had always found him to be nervous, overly cautious for someone with a stable post. Now it made sense. Burke wasn't just a passive observer, he was moving money. Complex laundering routes traced back to him through at least 5 different offshore chains. Then came the gut punch: Felix. Or rather, Ryan Wells, Sophia's brother and a broker at a major investment firm in Chicago. His fingerprints were all over the trading logs, acting as the facilitator for Harper's insider deals. Logan had once shared dinners with Ryan, exchanged family holiday greetings, even consulted him on investment trends. And the entire time, Ryan had been embedding illegal trades deep within the global market system. Logan's suspicion wasn't confirmation, though. That came hours later when he uncovered a buried email chain. It had taken weeks to decrypt the server backup, but there it was, Sophia and Don's messages exchanged long before she met Logan. Their conversation outlined everything: how to exploit his role, how to embed surveillance, how to dismantle him when the time came. His psychological profile had even been discussed in detail. He was a project, not a person. But Logan didn't rage. His focus only sharpened. Everything became cleaner, more systematic. He adjusted his tactics, consolidated files, mirrored every device he touched, and segmented his evidence into legal-grade backups stored across multiple cloud and offline nodes. Jasmine, now operating fully as his partner in the investigation, helped set up discreet surveillance and establish secure communication lines with Agent Lila Moreno from the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division. Logan met with Lila in neutral locations: quiet cafes outside the capital, quiet corners of public libraries. At first, she had been skeptical. Internal corruption cases were always landmines. But Logan's documentation, pristine, categorized, time-stamped, won her over. She assigned a covert task force, agreeing to let Logan continue gathering intel while she prepared the legal scaffolding behind the scenes. The goal wasn't to react. It was to entrap. Sophia's behavior, meanwhile, began to shift. She became colder. Her concern felt more rehearsed. She started testing Logan's limits with subtle provocations. Mentions of Harper's name, curiosity about his case files, veiled questions about secure server access. Once, she even left her phone on their coffee table with Harper's name visible in a recent call log. Logan didn't take the bait. He noted it, logged the time, and added another entry to his private file. He wasn't trying to confront her. He was documenting a criminal in real time. The final proof came in the form of surveillance footage from Harper's office, acquired through legal loopholes and internal access protocols Jasmine had secured months prior. It showed Harper in private meetings with corporate insiders, all tied to pending regulatory actions. Women entered confident, professional. Hours later, they left shaken, their expressions hollow. These weren't meetings, they were transactions. Jasmine cross-referenced 15 victims. 3 had attempted suicide. 7 had left the financial industry entirely. The others remained trapped in silence. Logan saw his own trajectory reflected in their stories, except he had escaped early, and now he had the power to make sure no one else suffered the same fate. By the end of March, the blueprint was complete. Multiple data sets matched, communications decrypted, surveillance footage timestamped and validated, trading patterns exposed. Every account, every interaction, every act of coercion recorded and preserved. Logan had rebuilt himself from ashes into something cold, deliberate, and dangerous. The machine they once mocked had become their reckoning. The Bureau's annual gala in July 2024 had always been more theater than celebration. This year, however, the Great Hall of the National Civic Center glowed brighter than ever. Crystal chandeliers hung above a sea of tailored suits and sequined gowns. Soft chamber music flowed like warm perfume through the grand marble columns. For the financial elite of Washington, it was business dressed as elegance. For Logan Pierce, it was the stage. From the edge of the hall, he watched the carefully choreographed movements of Don Harper and Sophia Lane. They stayed apart just long enough to draw attention, then gravitated toward the same spot, near the central platform, within view of the press cameras that had discreetly been invited. Everything about their interaction that evening was calculated. The occasional glance, the shared laughter, the light brush of fingertips over champagne flutes. Logan recognized the plan. It had been detailed months ago in one of Sophia's emails. An elaborate piece of performance meant to discredit him publicly. The idea was simple: paint him as the delusional, emotionally unstable husband. A relic, a man broken by pressure. And while the crowd stared, Harper and Sophia would become the tragic romantic heroes, caught in a scandal too passionate to deny. What they didn't know was that every detail had already been reverse engineered by Logan. He had chosen the gala for a reason. Nearly every major figure in financial regulation was in attendance. Officials from the Justice Department, senators from oversight committees, heads of investment firms, and even a few carefully selected journalists who had received encrypted briefings from Logan's FBI contact, Agent Lila Moreno. At precisely 8:17 p.m., Just as the chairman took the podium to begin his annual remarks, Sophia dropped her champagne glass. The sharp sound rang through the hall. All eyes turned. She took a theatrical breath, turned to Don, and kissed him, boldly, dramatically. Murmurs spread through the crowd like electricity. Then came her voice, just loud enough to cut through the quiet. "I can't pretend anymore," she said, facing Logan from across the room. "Don and I are in love. We've been hiding it for too long. I deserve better than being ignored by a man who only sees data." Don stepped forward with practiced regret, playing the role of reluctant lover. "Logan, we never meant for this to happen. But you haven't been yourself. You're not well. The Bureau needs stability." The trap had been sprung. Logan stepped forward slowly, his expression unreadable. "Interesting timing," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Tell me, Don, would this concern about my behavior have anything to do with the trades linked to the Callahan-Sterling merger? Or perhaps the collapsed Fenwick deal?" A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Don's polished mask flickered for a moment. Sophia stiffened. Logan continued. "It's fascinating how patterns emerge. Insider knowledge, account laundering, coercion. You can hide a lot behind fake relationships and shell companies, but you can't hide data." He gave a subtle nod. Suddenly, catering staff moved toward the exits, locking them in coordinated fashion. From the crowd emerged FBI agents, badges visible, movements precise. Agent Moreno walked to center stage, her voice cutting through the air. "Don Harper, you are under arrest for securities fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." The hall erupted in a frenzy of gasps, movement, and stunned silence. Sophia's face collapsed in disbelief as two agents stepped toward her. "You planned this?" she whispered, her voice sharp with panic.
"No," Logan answered quietly.
"You did. I just made sure the ending was different." Within minutes, the entire structure collapsed. Ethan Burke was detained near the punch table, still clutching a wine glass. Ryan Wells tried to exit through a side corridor but was intercepted. Caleb Knox's phone was disabled remotely before he could delete anything. Derek Stone stood motionless, pale, as agents read him his rights. Logan handed Agent Moreno a final encrypted drive. It contained everything: trade records, surveillance footage, communications between Harper and his accomplices, financial trails tied to every illegal move. The evidence wasn't just substantial, it was airtight. The next day's headlines spread across every platform. "Massive insider trading ring exposed within Federal Bureau. Deputy Director Don Harper arrested in Gala scandal. How one quiet investigator took down a financial empire." The public fallout was swift. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Investment firms rushed to distance themselves from implicated players. The Bureau's entire enforcement division underwent emergency restructuring. But for Logan, it wasn't the spectacle that mattered. It was the silence after the storm. In the quiet of his apartment, he reviewed the final recordings, the final statements. He thought about Ruby Allen's betrayal, how that first wound had nearly broken him. Then he thought of Sophia not as a partner but as a calculated threat. Her attempt to destroy him had only sharpened his instincts. Don Harper and his network had underestimated the one thing they couldn't see in data: patience. Logan hadn't needed revenge. He needed precision, timing, leverage, and he had used all three with surgical accuracy. The public believed this was the climax of the story. But Logan knew better. This was just the turning point. December 2024 arrived with a coldness that seemed to freeze the city's pulse. In the federal courthouse overlooking downtown Raleigh, the trial that had captivated the financial world was finally nearing its conclusion. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back wall. Victims of the fraud filled the public gallery, and representatives from nearly every regulatory agency occupied the benches with grim anticipation. At the center of it all sat Don Harper, flanked by his legal team, his once impeccable appearance now dulled by fatigue and the gravity of his downfall. The man who once moved through halls with tailored certainty now shifted restlessly in his chair, waiting for the judge's decision. When Judge Evelyn Cross entered, The room stood in silence. Harper's final statement had been a carefully rehearsed attempt to cast himself as a misunderstood reformer, someone who had simply played the financial game more efficiently than others. But the mountain of evidence, compiled and cross-referenced by Logan Pierce and delivered with surgical clarity, had dismantled every narrative he tried to spin. The judge's voice echoed clearly through the hushed chamber. "Mr. Harper, you didn't just bend the rules. You built an empire on destroying them. You manipulated, blackmailed, and coerced your way through an institution built to protect investors. This court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison, with no eligibility for early release." Sophia Lane's sentence followed soon after. The court had reviewed her involvement extensively, her emails, her role in securing internal access, her psychological manipulation of Logan. The evidence had made it impossible for her to claim coercion or ignorance. Her sentence, 12 years. She didn't cry, but as the cuffs clicked around her wrists, her expression fractured. The same careful mask that had once concealed her duplicity now splintered under the weight of exposure. The others fell like dominoes. Ryan Wells, whose testimony had exposed hidden offshore channels in exchange for leniency, received 5 years in a minimum security facility. Ethan Burke, caught laundering tens of millions through shell companies, was sentenced to 15. Derek Stone's involvement in the blackmail ring earned him 13 years, and Caleb Knox, the Bureau's IT director, who planted surveillance tools and erased audit trails, received 10. Logan watched it all from the back of the courtroom, seated beside Emma Kwan and Agent Lila Moreno. The satisfaction wasn't emotional, it was structural. What mattered most was not that they were punished, but that the damage they caused was being repaired, root by root. In January 2025, Logan was officially appointed Director of Enforcement. The Commission's confirmation was unanimous. His first act in office wasn't symbolic. It was systemic. He implemented the Pattern Integrity Protocol, an AI-enhanced system designed to detect early indicators of coordinated fraud. He mandated periodic rotation of senior staff to reduce opportunities for internal capture, expanded whistleblower protections, and created a transparency unit that could audit even the most protected layers of internal bureaucracy. The Bureau didn't just change. It evolved. Emma was named Deputy Director shortly after, and their working relationship quietly shifted into something personal. There were no dramatic declarations, no public hand-holding. Just two people who had seen how deep the rot could go and chose to rebuild something honest in its place. The restitution fund, fueled by asset seizures and court-ordered penalties, began returning stolen capital to victims. For some retirees and families, it was the difference between surviving and starting over. For Logan, it was the clearest sign that this story had never really been about him. It was about what could be saved when someone refused to look away. Ruby Allen, his first wife, had sent a letter in the wake of the scandal. In it, she offered explanations, reflections, fragments of apology. Logan read it once, then filed it away. Not out of bitterness, but closure. Some chapters didn't need rewrites, only endings. By spring of 2026, Logan's name had begun circulating through international finance communities. Delegations from across Europe and Asia visited the Bureau to learn about the reforms. Business schools added his work to ethics modules. Foreign regulators adopted versions of his detection system. Some called it the Pierce framework. Others simply called it the turn, the moment when institutional failure became institutional defense. Meanwhile, the conspirators faded from relevance. Don Harper, once the architect of silent power, now occupied a federal cell in upstate New York, under strict monitoring after multiple attempts to regain influence from within. Sophia's request for sentence reduction was denied after evidence of further deception emerged. Derek Stone was facing additional charges after more blackmail victims came forward. Logan no longer monitored their trials or updates. That chapter was over. Instead, he focused on the future. On a mild April morning, Logan stood in his new office, overlooking the Capitol skyline. Emma walked in with coffee and the first file of the day, anomalous trades connected to a growing tech fund in the Pacific Northwest. Pattern was emerging. He took the file and smiled, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Betrayal had once tried to silence him. Now it had taught him how to listen better.